Welcome to the Mass Effect HYPEcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this is a podcast about Mass Effect, the future of BioWare's premier franchise, and all of our speculation and hope and ideas for the next game. Before we get started, subscribe to the Mass Effect HYPEcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel and get all of my videos, including this podcast. And for Mass Effect, a ton of videos I've recorded and will be recording here in the next few weeks. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of the other content I do, check out the links in the description of this show. If you have your own topics, your own questions, or feedback, be sure to let me know in the Discord, in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at The Bonfire. Getting into the show, I want to kick it off with just kind of talking about where we're at, what we're doing. We're in the lead up to N7 Day 2024. That's why I'm recording this. This is my let's talk about what we might get, what I hope we get when it comes to N7 Day, and all of the factors that may impact that. I also want to do a kind of last check-in about Dragon Age The Veilguard. Not necessarily about that game, but about how the things we've learned about that game and kind of how it's come to be, how I think those things may impact the next Mass Effect. I think that's a interesting topic and may lead to some interesting thoughts. When it comes to N7 Day, I'm doing this podcast now. I may do another video next week or in the next couple weeks, but it's really going to be kind of waiting for actual N7 Day to happen. On that day, I plan on streaming, being on, either just chatting while we wait for the blog to drop. I may even do a little streaming of Mass Effect or even the Veilguard at that point, which it's kind of crazy. I think it'll be out. We'll have a BioWare game released in 2024, and that's pretty darn cool. Currently, the plan is to have to do a live show over on Kala Elizabeth's YouTube channel with N7 Legend, and we'll be I guess the timing will depend on what we talk about. If the blog has dropped, we'll probably be talking about that. We'll see. I suspect all of us will want to be covering that stuff in our own time, but we can wait and find out. If the blog hasn't dropped yet, I'm sure we'll just talk about something similar to this show and doing a little bit of speculation and such. After N7 Day, after the blog drops, you can expect me to be posting a whole bunch of stuff on YouTube, on social media. I'll be digging through all of the, whatever we get, the screenshots, the, concept art, any teasers or trailers that we get. I'll be digging into all of that and going into hyper conspiracy theory mode, I guess. And then in the following days, I'll do what I did last year, where I'll break down any specific parts of the blog that I think are worth kind of expanding on, as well as doing kind of summaries of everything we learned during N7 Day. It's also notable that at least in the last couple of years, N7 Day is also when we tend to maybe get either from Jeff Grubb or some other sources, some rumors tend to drop about what's going on with that game, what's going on at BioWare. We'll get into that as well if that happens. And then finally, I assume within a week or so of N7 Day, I'll have another episode of this podcast, hopefully with N7 Legend, like we've done before, where we kind of summarize everything and talk about how we feel and what we think is going on. Maybe we'll have some insider takes if we've heard anything from anyone ourselves. And hopefully he can join with that. I enjoy having him on. I think we have very similar goals for the next game and where the franchise and BioWare goes. But I think we have some different takes on how that may happen, maybe different confidence levels and stuff. I don't know. We'll see where we're both at. And if he can't come, I'll still do the same thing. But I am excited. There's lots going on between the Veilguard coming out and N7 Day coming. And that's what we're going to start off with. So let's talk about N7 Day 2024, my predictions and hopes, as well as kind of setting the stage for where it seems like BioWare is at and how that may impact it. So I think most people are taking a pretty conservative route when it comes to what they're expecting from N7 Day, especially this year. Last year was interesting. We got a blog that honestly didn't give us much, and we got a trailer that was about 30 seconds long and was released over like 4 hours. I kind of don't want that again. It was cool, obviously, seeing them put out some actual like video assets. Spending the time to make a trailer that was in engine. It was probably made by BioWare. That's cool, because if you have to consider that in previous years, like back to 2020, that reveal trailer for the next game that was shown at the Game Awards was made by a separate studio. It's not uncommon, especially in like pre-production, for trailers and assets to not even be made by the studio who's developing the game, but instead to be made by a contracted studio that is under the direction of the development studio. They don't just make up a bunch of stuff. That's why, we've spent so much time speculating about that trailer from 2020, because, BioWare directed that completely, but it was made by someone else. In 2023, seeing an asset that was probably made by BioWare themselves, that was really exciting. So I kind of hope we don't get that again. What I would actually prefer to get is something much more akin to what we got in 2022. If you remember back to that one, that was where they had basically a bunch of concept art. It was 4 or 5 pieces of concept art we had never seen before, as well as that that kind of video-ish, that motion video of the mass relay under construction by somebody. That had the voiceover that we eventually found was an encoded voiceover from Liara. So that is kind of what I would prefer this year. The trailer last year, again, was cool, but especially the way they revealed it by releasing, I think, in 3 parts. That took a total of, it was like 5 hours that they spent releasing that. That was, at least in my opinion, kind of obnoxious. And I didn't particularly like it. The end result was fine, but the actual release I thought was kind of underwhelming, especially because it got to the point where after they released the second part, the first part was just basically the character's legs walking, and you could kind of tell like, oh, this might be like an N7 or whatever it was. There was that, and then the second part showed it all the way up until right before the character turned. So you saw it was an N7, you saw the armor, you saw the legs, you saw it was like a feminine figure, but you didn't see the face. And I remember, and that was when it was like a multi-hour gap until the next part of it released. And I know in our chat, I was streaming this live, everyone was freaking out like, oh my gosh, are we about to see like Shepard turn around? Like, oh, this is so cool. Everyone got so hyped, was waiting. And then it came out, and it was this helmeted figure that really didn't reveal anything to us, but like a cool looking helmet. And then they walked out into this dock and whatever it was. So I kind of hope we don't get that. I would love something more akin to 2022, maybe some statements from the developers, obviously something from Mike Gamble. If they could, it'd be really cool if they gave like hey, we plan on starting full production at some point in 2025, like just confirmation of that. I've seen people speculate that maybe they'll reveal the title of the game. There's all the arguments about Mass Effect 4 and Mass Effect 5. It's almost certainly going to have a subtitle. It won't be numbered. Andromeda kind of threw out the numbering system, in my opinion, because it seems like this next game is going to be taking place after Andromeda. So you can't really call it Mass Effect 4 because it's not a direct sequel to that necessarily. It gets all complicated. I'm expecting a subtitle. I'm not expecting them to tell us that yet. I've even had people, and I actually agree to a point, talk about like, oh, well, they should let us know if Shepard's going to be in the next game and things like that. I would love that, because I would love to start setting that expectation properly in my own head. The problem is that, and they made it clear in the blog last year, where they said, like, we know you have lots of questions. And the last question was, what happened to obviously referencing Shepard, and then going away from it. They know that's one of the things that people care about the most, which unfortunately means they're probably going to hold that super tight to their chest until they can't anymore, because that's going to drive conversation. So I don't expect them to address that. What I think they could truly talk to us about for this one, what I think is most likely is maybe a confirmation of Unreal Engine 5 being used. That's a pretty safe thing to throw out there. It's certainly been decided at this point if that's what they're going to do, and it seems like they are from many of the things they've done in the last couple of years. That's about the biggest thing I think that we can be like guaranteed. I could be wrong. We could get a lot more than that, but that's like the one thing I'm like kind of honestly hoping for, because I think it's the most likely. There are things to consider about what they're going to show or not. I think the current development situation is a big one. Over the last year, especially, we've seen that, like EA Motive had been over helping out BioWare with Dragon Age. We even saw reports earlier this year in 2024 that Mass Effect devs, people on that pre-production team, were also helping out. It's possible that they haven't had a lot of overhead or time or resources to make a lot of stuff for N7 Day this year. It's worth considering that even that little 30-second trailer, especially if that was done in-house, probably took months, like probably took at least weeks, probably took a long time, right? And it's especially because they don't have like a full production team right now. They likely didn't put an entire, cinematic team on that. That was probably a fairly small thing. And it's important to remember stuff like that. We've recently heard in the last, couple of months before the Veilguard comes out that EA has put some BioWare devs over in a reverse order to EA Motive to help them work on the Iron Man game. Like I said before, noting that at some point, some of their devs were helping BioWare. I've actually reached out to someone who's in this situation and just kind of said like, hey, some people in my Discord are freaking out about this. What is going on, if you don't mind telling me? And I basically, I understood kind of what was going on, but their clarification was basically, some of us are done with our stuff on Veilguard or have been for a little while. They kind of don't want us just sitting around not doing anything. So we're going over there to help until Mass Effect is ready. That was an interesting response I got, because I hadn't even talked about Mass Effect. I kind of just said, your next project, and that was kind of cool, because it kind of means that, what I was predicting is likely true. It's the whole idea that, we know they're still in pre-production on Mass Effect. They have been for at least 4 years at this point, maybe even a little longer. It's putting up that scaffolding. So consider that. I don't think it's been like all hands on deck at BioWare to prep assets for N7 Day. That doesn't mean there haven't been a decent number of people working on it. Maybe over the last couple months, some of these BioWare folks that we haven't heard are helping other places have been working on Mass Effect, or maybe working on assets for this little fan celebration. We'll have to wait and see. It's also a really big factor, the relation to Veilguard when it comes to release date. N7 Day happens 1 week after the Veilguard drops. And that presents, I think, one of two choices from EA and BioWare. They can try not to step on Veilguard's toes. I would still argue at this point that Mass Effect is their like more notable franchise, the one that people are more, probably more fans, more notoriety, that is still there as the, the intro of this podcast. I still think that Mass Effect is BioWare's premier franchise, right? So you may not want to release a big drop about Mass Effect in the days, in the week after Dragon Age comes out, because it may, take people's attention away from this game that you just put out after years and years of development that like needs to be good, that needs to be received well. There's also the issue, like I said before, about how much time or resources have even been available. Now, the other line of thought could be different. It could be a thing of, a lot of eyes are on BioWare right now, especially if the reception of the Veilguard is positive. There's a lot of eyes on BioWare. that was our first punch. Let's hit them with the second punch of some really cool info about the next Mass Effect. Let's carry on that momentum. And therefore, if they release info about Mass Effect, that gets a bunch of people excited. That also gets eyes on BioWare and their next game that just came out, right? So you could look at it that way as well. It could be an opportunity for them to double up on the exposure to help both their game that just came out and their game that is going to come out one day. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So I don't know. I'm really curious to what that may mean for what we actually get from this N7 day. Like I said before, it would be great if we get some big, like a 2-minute long trailer that tells us everything about where the game is set. If we get Mark Meer and Jennifer Hale doing a video being like, "We're back, everybody." If we get, this like 100-page document saying exactly what happened to all of our old squad mates and what happened to the Milky Way since the end of 3 and all this stuff and how Andromeda is going to be involved in the next game. That would be fine, whatever. But that's probably not going to happen. And I think it's important to kind of set those expectations properly now. Like I said earlier, I think it's good to expect nothing. There's a really good chance, there's a possibility they release a little blog with some new merch, with a statement from Mike Gamble, a statement from the head of BioWare, whatever his name is. Of course, I'm going to forget it in the middle of this video. And maybe a couple screenshots, if that. And it may be nothing. There just may not be a big reveal for this one. And that's worth considering. I don't think that's likely. I think they've kind of been, stepping it up as the time has gone by. So I understand if there's people who are expecting something even more than last year, even more than the trailer and stuff like that, because that is kind of the expectation they've set. But I think if you don't want to be an angry gamer, I think if you don't want to get upset about them not doing exactly what they thought they would, I would suggest maybe not going that deep. Me personally, I'm expecting nothing and I'm hoping for everything. So if it doesn't happen, it's all good. I wasn't expecting it. But if it does happen, I was definitely hoping for it and I'm super hyped. So I think that's a good, kind of a good place to leave that. When it comes to future in 7 days, I think that's where the conversation gets more interesting. When I was going through, if you check out my YouTube, I just did a video. It's over an hour long where I went through everything I could find that they've released about the game, either officially or articles from kind of leaks and rumors and, just speculation really. And when I was going through that, I found a blog from February of 2022. And it was them announcing Dragon Age at the time, Dreadwolf, now Dragon Age The Veilguard going into production. Now, if you actually read the blog, what it says is they're in the middle of production. It also says that in the previous year, 2021, they had finished the scaffolding or finished preparation for Dragon Age. I assume that was them saying that they finished pre-production. And what I'll surmise is that my guess is that maybe in mid 2021, they finished pre-production and they probably started full production in late 2021. And then when they did this blog in February, they were in the production already. That sets what is essentially a, full production timeline of about 3 years. So let's say October of 2021 to October of 2024. There's 3 solid years. I know some people may be like, no, they've been working on it for 8 years. That's always like what's talked about. How long a game takes to develop is kind of a weird subject, because people often include like pre-production or even like prototyping and like pre-production stuff. They'll say a game was in development for 10 years. The recent game by PlayStation, Concord, I've seen that. Oh, they were working on this game for 10 years. Like, they probably did production on it in like the last 2 or 3 years. And then they spent the years before that doing pre-production, concepting, prototyping, all that. So what I would put together is I fully expect Dragon Age or the next Mass Effect. I think we'll get a blog from BioWare in probably early 2025 saying, hey, everyone, I hope you're enjoying Dragon Age The Veilguard. This is just a blog to let you know that in 2024, we finished up our planning, our preparation for Mass Effect, and we're in the middle of full production on that game now. So, more than likely, that would be referencing like the very end of this year. They may even say it's begun in 2025. So if you play that out, that leads to a timeline of probably 2028. If we're going to say a similar development cycle. I think there's a lot of reasons to think that may not be the same. I suspect that had Dragon Age The Veilguard not had multiple kind of reboots of what type of game it was going to be, as have been rumored and speculated and reported on, had COVID-19 not happened, and the disruptions that absolutely caused in this game, and likely even impacts it today. I think you can make an argument that maybe without those things, that maybe Dragon Age The Veilguard would have only had like a 2-year production cycle, maybe 2.5. And then if you want to push that over to Mass Effect, which hopefully, knock on wood, will not deal with those similar kinds of issues. I would say we're looking at a 2027, late 2027, and the like perfect, absolute, no issues come up circumstances of seeing the next Mass Effect. I would say it's more likely 2028 at some point, and worst case scenario 2029. That would upset me for various reasons because I don't want to wait that long and stuff. It would also make me mad because I raised a big stink when Jeff Grubb said 2029 or even 2030 when he did some stories about where the next game was at. I still think the way he got to those numbers at the time were flawed. It was very much out of one side of his mouth was kind of reporting something he had actually heard that had nothing to do with that. Basically, just he reported that Mass Effect is in like super early stages, which we all know it's in pre-production. And then he, in kind of the same breath, was like, so if it takes as long as Dragon Age, then it won't come out until 2029 or 2030. When that was him just kind of speculating. It still annoys me a little bit because it kind of felt like he was putting those two things together. I think he's even clarified sort of that he wasn't. I don't know. At the end of the day, that number isn't insane at this point, and it makes me mad to admit that I may have been off base on some of my reactions to that, but we'll see. I don't know. That said, for future in 7 days, so that means that we probably have 3 or 4 more in 7 days before that game even comes out. And so we need to think about that. Like, you need to consider that. It's very likely the N7 day right before it comes out, either in 3 or 4 years, will be big. They'll have all kinds of stuff to show us, but you have to think about what's in between then. I'm expecting very little this year in 2024. 2025 probably could be a lot more. They'll have likely be in full production. That means that there'll be tons of like concept art and other assets they can show off, probably even like early animations and environments and stuff like that. 2026, even more of that. 27, hopefully that's the last one before the game comes out, obviously even more. So I'm excited. I'm hopeful, but I'm expecting nothing. And I think you probably should too. Moving over to the part of this conversation about Dragon Age The Veilguard and my final thoughts on that. I'm really excited. I'm not a Dragon Age guy. I'm not really a high fantasy gamer. I've not really gotten into the previous Dragon Age games. I played a decent amount of Inquisition and never finished it because I just couldn't. It just wasn't my jam. But I am excited for The Veilguard for a few reasons. I'm excited to see what a BioWare game looks like in 2024. I'm excited to see them just release something, and I'm hoping that that's going to be a really good thing for the longevity of their studio. I'm excited to see what we can take from this game and potentially, consider or speculate about the next Mass Effect and how that could affect what we get in the future. I'm also excited to see the things that it may not predict. I think that if you look back at the Dragon Age games and the Mass Effect games, I don't think, and if you disagree with me, please feel free to do that in any of the various ways I've let you know you can contact me. But I kind of feel like their development has never like really mirrored each other. I feel like that they've definitely been very different franchises in the way they've been handled and developed. That may be less true now because it seems like Mass Effect and Dragon Age are basically being developed by the same studio and the same team. It doesn't really seem like they're running like a true like dual team studio anymore, where there's one team just working on Mass Effect and one team just working on Dragon Age. It seems like they're going to bounce the entire studio back and forth from here on out. So that may be less true, but I still think there's going to be a lot to take from Veilguard when it comes out. I think the most compelling part of that we can pay attention to is the fact that Dragon Age The Veilguard isn't doing the big like Inquisition open world, where it's just this one big open world and everything, or it's in a few different areas, but you know what I mean. That they are going back to, in some capacity, the kind of Mass Effect trilogy hub and mission style game where, we know we have, I believe it's called the Keep, or the Tower, where, that's our home base, even though there is some exploration there. And then there's going to be basically, we go out into these various smaller world areas to, do a little bit of exploration, but really to access mission areas and stuff like that. I think that's really cool. That's what I want. As much as I've enjoyed the big giant open worlds of a lot of games, I will be the first one to tell you that I'm kind of over that. And I kind of miss the kind of Mass Effect style game, where you have your ship as the hub, or you have the Citadel or whatever. And then you go to these various locations that, maybe they're recycled, maybe they're unique, each one, but these like mission areas, and you do a thing and then you're done. I think that's interesting just getting away from the open world thing idea, but also like if we want the next Mass Effect in 2 or 3 years, we probably don't want it to have another game like Andromeda that's like 5 planets that are like a pretty sizable open world. That's gonna take 10 years, like especially with modern day fidelity and everything that people expect. It's why I really believe that the Veilguard going to this is probably a preview of Mass Effect. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the next Mass Effect tries to do the same thing. There was a rumor at one point, Jez Corden had kind of thrown it out there, that the next Mass Effect game probably will be more of that traditional style. I had contacted him directly at one point about it, and he had kind of clarified that it wasn't like a rumor he had heard from like a BioWare person directly. He had claimed it was like an industry rumor. So it sounded like it was like someone had heard from someone that BioWare was kind of going back in this direction, this more kind of old school way of making their games. And I'm all for it. I hope that's correct. I hope that's completely true. I don't need the next Mass Effect to be a big giant open world game, especially, we've seen it with Starfield as well, with space games that is almost kind of a negative in some capacity. I think that the length of the Veilguard that we've heard about, and that it's 35 to 40 hours for the main story, or I think it's 30 to 40, and then like up to 100 hours if you do like a full complete run of everything. That's perfect. I don't need another Assassin's Creed Valhalla that like the straight up Golden Path main line of the game is like 90 hours. And especially because it's padded by busy work and things like that. I don't want that. I want a game that I can get through in 25, 30 hours if I really just want to get through the main story, so I can replay other versions and try different things and make different choices. But if I want to really dig in and spend a few months, completely destroying, getting everything in the game, getting every achievement and all that stuff, then that's there too. I just don't want that to be the assumption. There's been a few games recently that like people really said that had this game been 20 hours, it would have been one of my games of the year, but instead it's 50, and it made me hate it. That's definitely how I felt about Dragon's Dogma 2. And there's been some other games that kind of fit that description as well. So I think that may be a preview as well as what we may be getting from the next Mass Effect. I think that what they're going to do with DLC and all of that with the Veilguard will be interesting and will definitely impact how quickly we get news about the next Mass Effect. I believe at this point there's been no talk about them doing DLC. And this has even been brought up in interviews and stuff with the Veilguard devs. And the response was kind of like not completely dismissing the idea of DLC, but definitely feeling like, I believe it was the Trespasser DLC for Inquisition. That is a huge lead up to what this next game is for Dragon Age. And they've, the devs and the people on the Veilguard have said like, that shouldn't have been DLC. Like that should have just been part of the game. And that sentiment kind of told me like, maybe there are no plans. Maybe they feel like this experience they're going to put out is the full experience and there's no need for DLC. Especially if there's going to be pressure either within BioWare or from EA on BioWare to move on to the next thing that's going to make them money. So there's been some speculation that it kind of depends on how the Veilguard performs. If it sells really, really well, if it gets really high scores, maybe they will get, the permission or the resources to do DLC. But I kind of get the feeling that's not really in the cards. So I'm kind of curious to what that may mean for the future. The development situation is kind of something I mentioned before where, like Star Wars: The Old Republic is no longer under BioWare. That's a big change in the last, I think, year or so. They no longer work on 3 games. They work on 2 games. And for all intents and purposes, it seems like they work on 1 game at a time. That's another thing that could speed up development for Mass Effect. And that, I assume for at least a portion of Dragon Age's development, they had resources over on Star Wars. They had resources on Mass Effect of some type. And they may have even had other, games that they were working on kind of in a very early level that we just don't know about or maybe still don't. I think that their situation with being a more, the corporate term would be like streamlined or efficient studio, smaller studio, may, it may, determine what we are getting here in the future. And then it comes back to I mentioned it before, the reception of Dragon Age The Veilguard. There's been a lot of talk. A lot of people have talked about how Dragon Age The Veilguard is BioWare's last chance. If it doesn't go well, they're gonna be out on their butts and EA is gonna shut down BioWare and that it's their last chance. I've even had some people who are in the know and have been around the devs and talked to them and interacted with them, in various ways, who have said that like that's kind of the sentiment amongst the devs, that they're, at least for some of the devs and some of the people in the studio, there is kind of a feeling that Dragon Age is a big deal, that it needs to do well for the security of their studio. I've long speculated that's not the case. I don't think that, I think EA would have shut down BioWare by now if Dragon Age was their last chance. Because I think the chances of BioWare making money on I almost called it Dreadwolf, on the Veilguard are pretty low. I don't think that it's very likely they're going to make money off of the game, just because it's been in development for so long that it could potentially still sell 10 or 20 million, 10 million copies and not make money. If it sells 20 million, they'll probably make money. So it's, I hope that's not EA's goal. And that it has to be a giant hit for BioWare to survive, because there's a decent chance it won't be like a huge hit. The general sentiment, it's interesting. If you're within the Dragon Age community, you may think that Dragon Age is like in shambles and is about to come out to like no excitement. I'll say from the outside, as like more of a normie fan, there's a ton of excitement for Dragon Age. There's a lot of excitement from like kind of the normie gamers that like, oh, BioWare looks like they might be back. Like, ooh, Dragon Age looks really cool. I loved Baldur's Gate 3 last year and has similar vibes. Like, I just, there's all these issues about like from Inquisition, there's only a few choices that are going to carry over from Inquisition to the Veilguard. Amongst the Dragon Age community, they are freaking out about that. Like, that's a big problem. And I've seen people be like, I'm not going to buy the game anymore when they talk about Veilguard. You have to realize that like 98% of the people who are going to buy this game have no idea what that all means. They don't care. They're either very casual Dragon Age fans, or they're people who haven't played a Dragon Age game in 10 years and they kind of don't care what happened before. They're just excited for a new game. Or they're people like me who are Mass Effect fans who just want to see something from BioWare. Or they're just, think about how many gamers are going to buy Dragon Age The Veilguard and get into the series who like weren't even born when the last game came out, or weren't old enough to be gaming in general. All of the people who were in their, in like the middle school age, or, even like preteen, teenage years, who maybe weren't interested in, Dragon Age Inquisition 10 years ago, but now they're in their 20s, or in their early 30s. And now they are interested because it's more, in their eyesight. So I think Dragon Age The Veilguard is going to do well. I wouldn't be surprised if it sells 10 million copies. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets I think an 80 plus Metacritic open critic score is like a guarantee, from the preview reactions I've seen and all of that. I'd be surprised if it gets up into the 90s, but people seem to be rooting for it. And you have to keep in mind the type of people who are actually the ones who make those scores and put those scores out there. They aren't those super hardcore Dragon Age fans who are fighting with everyone on Reddit or Twitter or in the YouTube comments. That they're kind of the more normal people who are going to play Dragon Age The Veilguard, enjoy it, maybe do a second playthrough, but may never touch it again because they're on to the next game, right? I really believe that that Dragon Age is set up to do really well. And I hope it does, because while I don't necessarily believe it's BioWare's last chance, enough people who I trust think that it's a pretty big deal for the future of BioWare. And so I would like to never know. I would like to have no idea how essential the Veilguard was to BioWare's future, because I would like it to do so well that whether it mattered or not, that they keep on trucking and they're able to get moving on Mass Effect. Now, I will say that I believe the next Mass Effect game is definitely a really big deal for BioWare, because my whole thing has been that EA might be more willing to eat Dreadwolf or the Veilguard not being a huge hit, and hoping probably just to break even on it. But there's definitely going to be pressure on BioWare for Mass Effect to not get delayed, to not be impacted by outside circumstances like COVID, to be developed as quickly as possible. The caveat with that being, EA could have probably made BioWare put out Dragon Age last year in 2023, and they didn't. There were rumors it was originally pegged to come out late 2023, and it got pushed back. It never got officially delayed because they hadn't announced it. But there were rumors at one point it was going to come out like a year ago. And so hopefully that means that EA appreciated and was willing to delay that release, or to not force them to release it early, because they did care about the quality of the game. And even BioWare themselves have talked a lot in their blogs and stuff in the recent years about, like, quality is their number one goal, even though that, it's arguable whether or not that's always EA's number one goal. I think it's hopeful that they were allowed to seemingly take their time and put the game out when it was truly ready. I just don't know if Mass Effect is going to get that patience in the future, because the EA's opportunity with Mass Effect is to have a game be developed more efficiently, more quickly, and for a bigger audience that could make, if it sold 10, 15 million copies, could make them a ton of money. And so we'll see. I'm pretty hopeful. I'm not overly anxious about it, especially because I think Dragon Age The Veilguard it's coming in good vibes. Even if the Dragon Age community themselves, which is a whole different topic, doesn't see it or doesn't believe it, as someone who's kind of on the outside looking in, and is hearing the chatter on the outside, I think people are pretty excited about Dragon Age The Veilguard, and I'd be amazed if it doesn't get a Metacritic score over 80, and I'd be amazed if it didn't sell at least like pretty good. 5 million plus copies, I would say, is pretty much a guarantee. that 10 million is, at least at one point, was definitely a big number for games to hit that. And hopefully they do, and going beyond that would only be better. So yeah. So there it is. There's my thoughts about the upcoming N7 day, what I'm hoping to see, what I think is realistic, kind of how I feel about the future of, what we may be hearing about, and, maybe when we'll be seeing the next Mass Effect game, as well as my kind of thoughts and feelings on Dragon Age The Veilguard and how it's kind of related to all of this stuff, including like BioWare's future and all of that. If you have any of your own thoughts, please let me know in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me up in all the other places I talked about before. But that's where I am going to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and please consider supporting via the links in the show description. That is all I have for this episode of the Mass Effect HYPEcast. So, until next time.